Hen and Mr Savage are two of the biggest names not just on their region but in the whole world, and when they teamed up this season, huge things were expected, but most of their results were quite disappointing. Suddenly in session 2 of the semi-finals everything changed. They won the session overall and changed their playstyle dramatically to do so. Let's see how they have turned their season around. First, I'll give you some background. Hen was playing with Queasy for the past 2 seasons, winning FNCS in a dominant Chapter 2 Season 1 and then disappointing in the next. Savage played with Benji during that time, but with Benji's love of the game fading, he moved over to Valorant. This left both of them needing a new duo, and after some brief partnerships with Andretta and Pink, they were left as the 2 best players in the EU market, and it would only make sense for them to play together. However, don't forget that even when you have 2 players of their caliber, they're not guaranteed to make a great duo. In the early season, they were definitely performing well under the expectations of themselves and their many fans. They failed to qualify for both of the duo Cash Cup finals before FNCS, finishing 65th and 74th. Sometimes it just doesn't work out for you. Every great team has failed to qualify for a Cash Cup or 2, but more concerning was their actual gameplay. We all know that the pro strategy is to key the games until you get a big win or end up near the top of the leaderboard, and when you key 15 different teams, you often end up dying eventually. But if it doesn't work in the first game, it usually does in the second, or maybe even the third. However, they really struggled to get any good result near the start of a tournament, dying consistently in every mid-game in the easier lobbies. And when they finally reached the top of the leaderboard, they seemed to be searching far too much for mid-game eliminations and scuffing themselves for every endgame. And then when an endgame was reached with any resources, there was a huge disconnect between the 2 players, usually resulting in one of them going down by the end of first moving zone, leaving the other one to try and clutch it up. Their FNCS qualifier results didn't look too bad, making all 3 finals, but that was just papering over the major issues as they struggled to qualify through many of the early rounds, and their finals placements were not particularly impressive either from an uncontested Tilted Towers. Now that I've explained what was going wrong, let's move on to what they did right in the semi-finals. Session 2 was a complete revelation. I asked Mr Savage what changed, and he said Blood X. Now Blood is a coach with a big reputation in the community, and he came in to help with their game strategy. Let's see what their strategy was and why it worked so well. One thing to note first is that Storm Surge was changed for the semi-finals. The details of the change aren't so important here, but the main point you need to know is that you needed a lot of damage throughout the game to survive the surge. Off spawn, they were actually contested by Polly and Wixes, 50-50ing the main building. This could have gone against them, but after generally outdropping them and then killing them off spawn 4 games in a row, they went elsewhere for the final 2 games. This gave Hen and Savage 200 damage immediately, and also given that the fights were over extremely quickly, it actually didn't compromise their looting time or the amount of heals or mats that was available for them to take into the rest of the game. In hindsight, it was an advantage for them to be contested, but it definitely could have played out much worse another day. The next few minutes of their game was of course spent looting and farming basically up to maximum materials, and they generally left tilted around the time that the first zone started closing, with max mats and 5 stacks of heals between them. If you've been watching Mr Savage's streams throughout the season, you'll know that this is very early for them to leave. The biggest problem with Tilted has always been that a lot of teams base up around it on the hills and a lot of teams rotate through it, and in a stacked lobby you want a relatively passive mid-game without spending all of your resources, so the middle of Tilted is pretty much the worst place to be, especially when the zones start to pull away from you. And this is where you usually found Mr Savage and his duo, unfortunately. This is a mistake that I saw over and over again from this duo and also when Benji was playing in the past as well. However, that mistake was totally absent this time, and if you want to know how to play mid-game in a stacked lobby, then seeing how they did it here is a perfect way to learn. 2 of the biggest advantages for Tilted Towers are that you are mid-map and you get plenty of ammo, and they use both of these advantages to perfection in their mid-game. Take a look at Game 1 here, where they get the first zone. Now some teams might be tempted to stay around the tilted hills and try to tag everyone moving towards them, but as they have 200 surge damage off spawn, they're not desperate for damage right now and can move northwest to a safer place, reserving a better position for the later zones, and also somewhere that they can refarm metal. Notice that they stay split to get 2 slightly different angles as well. Now the second zone appears, and this is such a perfect zone for them, and not just because they are near the middle of it. Let me explain. This overall zone is towards the northwest of the map, so the congested side is the south and the east, which means that there will be a lot of teams coming from those directions. And now consider where these teams will end up. If they want to get deep into the zone, they may need to make a dangerous lake crossing. But in all likelihood, they will all end up stopping on the edge of the zone, which means a lot of teams close to each other, some of whom need surge damage. And this means a lot of close range fights, which in turn can give easy tags to anyone looking at them. So if you had to pick the best position for surge for this second zone, it would be exactly where Hen and Mr Savage are. They have a viewpoint over the whole lake and all the teams around it, and 2 different angles of everything. And because they are quite central in the second zone, third zone unsurprisingly pulls on them, followed by fourth zone on Hen's position, and they finally group up at this point. They've managed to stay away from the other teams generally, which then allows them to make a super early rotation to a far 50-50 zone, using the natural terrain on one side of them to save even more mats. So they make it into the endgame, still with great mats and heals, and this is exactly what you want for a successful game. Before I talk about the endgame though, I would like to show another mid-game. This time it's one where they don't quite get the first zone. When the first zone starts closing, they go and base up at what will become the more congested edge of the zone. Nice and high up, and of course refarming everything, but because they are so near the edge, the risk is that they will become part of the congestion if they stay too long. To avoid that, here is the simple, yet effective moment. They leave this perfect surge spot 10 seconds before the first zone closes, i.e. before the second zone shows. They don't know where the second zone will be, but they start moving anyway. This means that they will stay ahead of every single team coming into their edge of the zone. They are not part of the congestion, they are ahead of them. And in all likelihood, the second zone will be further east than their current location, so it's just a good bet to move that way. The zone does go east, and they make sure they move towards it swiftly. The quicker you get there, the more choice you have of your next position, and they're able to get relatively central into the zone, giving themselves the great chance of getting third zone as well. And although they don't get fourth zone, they're away from the congested edge still and have a lot more freedom of movement, so this isn't an issue for them either. And that really was the strategy of their mid-game. They used the mid-map position to always stay away from the congested edge and ahead of everyone else. They looked back at the congested edge and used the large amount of ammo they had to get as many tags as possible, often from split bases to give 2 different angles. Because of their 200 damage off spawn and this positioning, they never needed to box fight anyone to get above surge. This is a huge advantage because box fights often end up with you being fully eliminated, or at least losing a team member. And with these tactics, they made all 6 endgames pretty much without being in trouble a single time. Mid-game is the area that I wanted to focus on here, and I've talked at length about it now, but I will mention their endgames as well. Their final placements were excellent, with 4 top 7s. Before this, we very rarely got to see them going into endgames with good resources, and when they did, they tended to lose each other and split up a lot. This time their magnetism was excellent. They were sticking to each other like glue, and this really is the first key to being a successful duo in endgames. Savage is of course the main tarper, and Hen is expected to take more of a lead in refreshes and fragging, but they're both fully capable of taking each other's roles when required. They played a mix of layers, favouring mid-ground layers when they had many mats, and ultimate low when they were short of mats or it looked free. But their excellent mid-game was what really won them this semi-final. I know you're all now wondering, can they win Grands in a few weeks? My honest answer is that I do not think that they have a great chance. Although their improvement was huge, the lobby was missing most of the very best teams on the region. Now mid-game is where you can lose your tournament completely, but endgame is where you win the big tournaments, and we are still waiting to see if they can really match the very best at that. Who knows, they may surprise us again and elevate their game once more, but I'm betting on Queasy Vino or Camiseti to take this one home this season. Thanks for watching, see you next time.